The first snowflake of winter landed on Mabel's workbench and melted instantly, leaving nothing but a wet shadow on the wood. She paused, mortar and pestle in hand, and watched another flake fall through the open window. Then another. The forest around her small cabin had gone unnaturally quiet, as if every living thing had suddenly remembered to hold its breath. Mabel crushed the nettle leaves harder, releasing their bitter green smell into the cold air. Her hands were stained dark from hours of work. Yarrow, frostroot, willow bark, all the remedies she'd learned to make in the 2 years since she'd left her pack's territory. 2 years since she'd walked away from everything that knew her name. The cabin was small. One room with a narrow bed pushed against the far wall, shelves crammed with glass jars, and bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams like forgotten decorations. It sat right on the border between Varin packlands and the unclaimed wilderness beyond. Close enough to trade with travelers, far enough that nobody asked questions she didn't want to answer. Her fingers drifted to her left shoulder without thinking, pressing against the fabric of her dress. Not because it hurt, more like touching a memory that refused to fully fade. The moon feast had been 2 years ago, but sometimes Mabel still saw the torches blazing in the pack circle, still heard the way the crowd had gone quiet when Darian Voss stood up and smiled at her. That calm, practiced smile that she'd mistaken for kindness right up until the moment he opened his mouth. "You're sweet, Mabel. But you're not fit to stand beside an alpha. Not as a mate. Not as a Luna." Someone had laughed. Then more people joined in, that rippling kind of laughter that spreads when everyone realizes the cruelty isn't aimed at them. And Darian had finished it with words that still lived under her skin. "Look at you. Too fat to have a mate. You'd break an alpha's pride before you ever warmed his bed." Mabel shook her head and forced her attention back to the herbs. Dwelling on old wounds didn't heal them. She'd learned that the hard way. She thought about Alara, her sister, who had screamed at the pack elders that night while Mabel walked away in silence. Alara had always been the brave one, sharp-tongued and fearless. But even Alara's anger couldn't undo what had been said in front of everyone who mattered. Kaya Rowan had been the only friend who'd checked on her afterward. Sweet Kaya with her worried eyes and quiet voice, bringing bread and cheese to Mabel's door like offerings to someone already dead. Kaya had tried to convince her to stay, but Mabel knew better. Once a pack decided what you were worth, there was no changing their minds. Deborah had found her 3 months into her exile. The old wandering healer had taught Mabel everything about plants and remedies, about fever and pain, and the simple truth that hunger didn't care about pack politics. Deborah had also warned her about the other gift, the one that ran in Mabel's bloodline like a secret river. "Your grandmother had it," Deborah had said, grinding herbs with practiced hands. "The old healing, life force work. It saved dozens of wolves, and it nearly destroyed her. Every time you use it, you give away something you don't get back." Mabel had listened, and she'd promised to be careful. She'd kept that promise so far. A knock on the door shattered the afternoon quiet. Mabel's hand went still on the mortar. Nobody came out here. Not unless something was wrong. She opened the door to find a young girl standing in the snow, breathing hard, her face red from running. "Please," the girl gasped. Her name was Winnie, maybe 12 years old, from the village an hour's walk north. "My mother can't stop shaking. She's burning up. We don't know what to do." Mabel's first instinct was to refuse. Going into the village meant eyes, whispers, reminders of what she used to be in their minds. But she looked at Winnie's frightened face and reached for her cloak anyway. "Show me." The walk to the village was cold and silent, except for Winnie's nervous chatter about her mother's symptoms. By the time they reached the small house on the village edge, Mabel's face hurt from the wind. Inside, a woman lay on a narrow bed, blankets piled high, her body shaking despite the fever burning through her. Maria. Mabel remembered her vaguely from market days before the rejection. "Please help her," Winnie whispered. Mabel knelt beside the bed and pressed her hand to Maria's forehead. "Hot enough to cook meat. This wasn't just a cold. This was something fighting hard to take root." She worked quickly. Willow bark tea for the fever, honey to soothe, warm compresses to draw out the heat. She spoke quietly to Maria, even though the woman couldn't hear her, explaining each step like Deborah had taught her. The temptation rose sharp and insistent. She could use the gift. Pull the sickness right out of Maria's body, end this in minutes instead of hours. But Deborah's warning echoed louder. "Every time you use it, you lose something you don't get back." Mabel pushed the thought away and kept working the normal way, the safe way, until Maria's fever finally broke, and her breathing steadied into something that sounded like sleep instead of struggle. Winnie hugged her so hard it hurt. Thank you so much." Mabel accepted a small payment, coins. Winnie's father pressed into her hand with gratitude in his eyes, and left before anyone else could ask questions. The walk home felt longer. The sun was setting, turning the snow orange and gold, and the forest around her seemed too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the held breath kind. Mabel stopped walking. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, not the normal territorial calls she'd grown up hearing. These were different, coordinated, intelligent. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with winter. She hurried toward her cabin, boots crunching through snow, her satchel bouncing against her hip. A shadow moved between the trees to her left. Mabel froze. Too big. Whatever had made that shadow was much too big to be a normal wolf. Then the sound came. Fighting. Snarls that made her teeth ache. The heavy impact of bodies slamming into frozen ground. Every instinct screamed at her to run home, bar the door, pretend she'd heard nothing. But beneath her dress, near her left shoulder, something warm pulsed against her skin. Not pain. Something else. A warning. Or maybe a call. Mabel's breath misted in the cold air. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the sounds of violence echoing through the darkening forest. Then, against every shred of common sense she possessed, she moved toward the noise. Hey, quick question, how are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. If Mabel's journey from humiliation to healing the Alpha King himself is touching your heart, please hit that subscribe button for Ariel Romance Library, smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let's get back to what happens when the woman Darian called too fat to have a mate becomes the one wearing the Alpha King's crown. The fighting grew louder as Mabel crept through the trees, her boots silent on snow that had started to freeze in the dropping temperature. She should turn back. She knew that. Whatever was happening ahead wasn't meant for her to see, wasn't something a lone Omega should walk into without protection. But her feet kept moving. Deborah had once told her that healers were cursed with hearts that couldn't ignore suffering. At the time, Mabel had thought it was a compliment. Now she wondered if it was just another way of saying she didn't know how to protect herself. She reached a cluster of rocks and dropped behind them, peering through a gap. The sight stole her breath. A white wolf stood in a clearing, surrounded by 5 attackers. Not white like snow. White like moonlight, given weight and form. Even injured, even bleeding from a dozen wounds, the wolf moved with a power that made Mabel's chest tighten. Dominance rolled off him in waves she could feel from 30 feet away. The kind of presence that didn't ask for submission. It demanded it on a level deeper than thought. The attackers were coordinated, working together to bring him down. Gray wolves, lean and vicious, darting in to slash and retreating before retaliation could land. The white wolf was faster than something that large should be. He caught one attacker by the throat and threw it into a tree with enough force that Mabel heard bone crack. Another wolf lunged, and the white one spun, teeth finding purchase, ripping through fur and flesh. But there were too many. And he was already hurt. Mabel watched a gray wolf tear open his hind leg. Blood sprayed across pristine snow, turning it dark. The white wolf staggered but didn't fall. His eyes, even from here, Mabel could see them. Gold, not the yellow gold of normal wolves. Something brighter, fiercer, intelligent in a way that made her skin prickle. 2 more attackers hit him from opposite sides. He went down hard. Mabel's hands pressed against the rock, her whole body tense. She wanted to look away, couldn't. The white wolf surged up with a snarl that shook the air. He caught the closest attacker and didn't just bite. He destroyed. The gray wolf dropped and didn't get up. The remaining attackers hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was enough for them to recognize what Mabel had seen from the start. This wolf was inevitable. Wounded or not, he would kill them before they killed him. They scattered into the forest like smoke. The white wolf stood alone in the clearing, sides heaving, blood dripping from too many places to count. His left front leg wouldn't hold weight properly. Deep gashes ran along his ribs. His breathing came harsh and labored. Then his legs buckled, and he collapsed into the snow. Mabel didn't think. She moved. Later, she'd wonder what madness had possessed her. This wolf could kill her without effort. Even half dead, he was dangerous in ways she couldn't begin to calculate. But watching something die when she had the ability to help felt impossible. She approached slowly, hands visible, making her presence known. Easy, she whispered. I'm going to help you. The wolf's head lifted slightly, those gold eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Intelligence looked back at her. Recognition, somehow. Like he understood exactly what she was offering. His head lowered again, a concession, or maybe just exhaustion. Mabel knelt in the blood-stained snow and assessed the damage. Deep gashes across his ribs that would need stitching. The torn leg, bite wounds that had missed vital areas by inches, blood loss that would kill him if she didn't work fast. All right, she said. more to herself than him. "You're either going to end me, or I'm going to save you. Either way, I can't leave you here." She grabbed his scruff, positioned herself, and pulled. He was impossibly heavy. Dense muscle and thick fur, dead weight that barely moved even when she used all her strength. Mabel's boots slipped on ice-slicked snow. Her shoulders burned. She pulled harder, managed to drag him a few feet, stopped to breathe, pulled again. The cabin was too far. It felt like miles instead of minutes. Her knees hit the ground. She grabbed his scruff again, braced herself, pulled until her muscles screamed. Inch by brutal inch, she dragged him through the darkening forest. The cold bit through her cloak. Sweat made her dress stick to her skin despite the temperature. Her hands went numb. Her back felt like it might break, but she didn't stop. When her cabin finally came into view, small and dark against the trees, Mabel nearly cried with relief. She hauled him up the 2 steps to her door, shoved it open with her shoulder, and pulled him inside. The wolf's blood left a dark trail across her floor. Mabel slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard, her whole body shaking with effort. Then she moved. Fire first. She coaxed the embers in her hearth back to life, and fed them until flames crackled and warmth started to fill the small space. Water. She filled her largest pot and set it to boil. Bandages. She pulled clean cloth from her shelf and tore it into strips. The wolf lay where she'd left him, breathing shallow but steady, his white fur matted with blood and dirt. Mabel knelt beside him and started cleaning wounds. Each gash revealed itself as worse than she'd hoped. These weren't random bites. These were deliberate attacks meant to cripple and kill. Whoever had sent those wolves wanted this one dead badly enough to coordinate an ambush. She worked by firelight, her hands steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Cleaned each wound with water and spirits that made the wolf's body jerk in unconscious pain. Threaded her needle with gut string and started stitching. The torn leg was the worst. Muscle and tendon visible through the tear. She stitched carefully, precisely, the way Deborah had taught her. "Don't you dare die here," she whispered. "I didn't drag you all this way to watch you give up now." The wolf's ear twitched, just slightly, like some part of him heard and understood. Mabel finished the leg and moved to the ribs. More stitches, more blood soaking into bandages. By the time she'd cleaned and closed every wound she could see, the cabin window showed full dark outside. The fire had burned down to coals. She sat back on her heels and looked at her work. The white wolf lay on her floor, wrapped in bandages, breathing steadily now. But his skin was too hot under her hand, fever building fast. Mabel's heart sank. Infection. Already taking root despite everything she'd done. She tried everything. Cool cloths on his head. Herbs mixed into warm water, forced between his jaws. Prayers to gods she wasn't sure existed. Nothing worked. The fever climbed higher. His breathing turned ragged. His body started to shake in a way that told her his system was losing the fight. Mabel pressed her hands flat against her thighs and made herself think. She had one option left. The gift Deborah had warned her about. The thing her grandmother had used until it drained her hollow. She could pull the fever out. Take his pain into herself. Save him the dangerous way. But what would it cost her? Mabel looked at the white wolf, at the way his powerful body trembled with sickness, at the gold eyes that had looked at her with such intelligence before closing. She couldn't let him die. Not after dragging him through snow. Not after stitching him back together. Not when she had the power to help, even if it destroyed her. "All right," she whispered. "One more time. Just once." Mabel placed both hands on the wolf's chest, just over his heart, and closed her eyes. She reached for that buried part of herself. The piece that felt like heat and pressure and something older than her own life. The air in the cabin changed, tightened. The fire flared brighter without her touching it. Then the pain hit. It poured into Mabel like ice water. Torn ribs, punctured lung, muscle damage. The fever burning through his blood. All of it flooding her system at once. She gasped, her hands locking in place, unable to pull away even as her vision blurred. This was worse than she'd expected. So much worse. She could feel his body fighting to survive. Could feel the infection spreading through him like poison. Could feel everything breaking inside him. And she pulled it out. Drew it into herself through sheer will and desperation. Knitted torn tissue back together. Sealed wounds from the inside. Burned away infection with heat that came from somewhere deep in her core. Her knees hit the floor. Sweat ran down her face. The cabin spun around her. But she held on. Held on until the fever broke. Until his breathing evened out. Until the damage inside him sealed and healed and became survivable. When she finally collapsed sideways onto the floor, her dress was soaked through with sweat, and her whole body felt hollow. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the white wolf's eyes opening. Gold, clear, fixed on her with something that looked like recognition. Then nothing. Mabel woke to pain, not the sharp kind. The deep, grinding ache that comes from pushing your body past its limits. Every muscle hurt. Her head pounded, her mouth tasted like copper. Firelight flickered across the cabin ceiling. Still night then. Or maybe a different night entirely. She had no way to know how long she'd been unconscious. She turned her head carefully and found the white wolf watching her. He lay on his side, bandages still in place, but his breathing looked normal now, strong. The fever had broken completely, and his eyes, those impossible gold eyes, studied her with an awareness that made something in her chest flutter. "You're still here," Mabel croaked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. The wolf's tail moved slightly. Not quite a wag, more like acknowledgement. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The room tilted dangerously. Her left shoulder burned with a heat that had nothing to do with fever. Mabel pressed her hand to the spot and felt something wrong. Not painful exactly, just different. Like her skin had changed texture overnight. She forced herself to standing, stumbled to the small mirror hanging near her bed, and pulled the collar of her dress down. Her breath stopped. Silver lines traced across her shoulder, just beneath the skin. They formed a pattern she didn't recognize. Intricate, deliberate, beautiful in a way that made her stomach drop because she knew what this meant, even though she'd never seen it before. A mark. Not just any mark. The kind her grandmother had whispered about before she died. The kind that came from using the old gift. The kind that bound healer to healed. "What did you do to me?" she whispered. Behind her, the wolf moved. Not much. Just enough that she heard the soft pad of his paws on the wooden floor. Mabel turned, one hand still pressed to her marked shoulder, and found him standing, unsteady but upright, powerful, despite the bandages. He limped closer, each step measured, and stopped directly in front of her. Then he lowered his massive head and pressed his muzzle against her shoulder. Exactly where the mark burned beneath her skin. His teeth grazed the fabric of her dress, not breaking skin, not threatening, something else entirely. Sealing. Heat flared through Mabel's whole body. The silver lines under her skin glowed, visible even through cloth. And in the center of the pattern, a new shape formed. A crown. Delicate silver lines drawing themselves in her flesh, creating a symbol that made her head spin because she knew what crowns meant in pack hierarchy. And there was only one wolf who could leave a mark like this. The white wolf pulled back slightly and looked at her. His gold eyes held something she couldn't name. Recognition. Claim. Maybe even apology. Then he turned and walked to the cabin door. Mabel's legs moved before her brain caught up. "Wait. You can't just leave. You're still healing. You need rest." And the wolf looked back at her one more time. The expression in his eyes made her words die. This wasn't a wolf who needed her permission. He nosed the door open and disappeared into the night. Mabel stood frozen in her empty cabin, one hand on her marked shoulder, and tried to understand what had just happened. 3 days passed in a blur of exhaustion and confusion. Mabel's body felt like it had been wrung out and hung to dry. Simple tasks took twice as long. Grinding herbs made her hands shake. Walking to the well left her breathless. But the mark wouldn't let her forget. It warmed at random moments, sometimes in the middle of the night, pulling her from sleep with a heat that felt like someone had pressed their hand to her skin. Sometimes during the day, sudden enough to make her drop whatever she was holding. And beneath the warmth came something worse. Emotions that weren't hers. Exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning. Fury that made her hands clench without reason. A determination so fierce it took her breath away. She tried to ignore it. Went about her routine like nothing had changed. Made her medicines. Organized her shelves. Patched a weak spot in her cabin roof. But the mark pulsed through it all. A steady heartbeat that didn't belong to her. On the 4th morning, she found something on her doorstep. A leather pouch, heavy and well-made, tied with a cord she didn't recognize. Mabel picked it up with trembling hands and loosened the tie. Gold coins spilled into her palm, more than she'd seen in her entire life. Enough to buy new supplies, repair her cabin properly, live comfortably for years. Payment, or maybe apology. She wasn't sure which. She sat on her front step with the pouch in her lap and stared at the forest. Snow had fallen again overnight, covering the bloodstains near her door, making everything look clean and innocent. "What were you?" she whispered to the empty morning. The mark gave no answer. Just that steady pulse, like a second heartbeat living under her skin. That afternoon, a merchant came through. Eldon Gray, a man who traveled the territories buying and selling goods, his cart always full of things people didn't need but desperately wanted. Mabel traded herbs for salt and flour, keeping the conversation brief. But Eldon liked to talk. "Heard news from the capital," he said while measuring out salt. "Big battle a few weeks back. Rebels tried to take down the Alpha King himself. Mabel's hands went still on the counter. King survived, Eldon continued, oblivious to her reaction. But barely. They say he disappeared for days after. Just vanished without telling anyone where he'd gone. The Alpha King, Mabel repeated carefully. What's his name? Ronan Drace. Eldon tied off the salt bag and set it on her counter. Young for a king, but fierce. They say he's never lost a fight, at least not until those rebels nearly gutted him. The mark on Mabel's shoulder flared hot enough to make her flinch. You all right? Eldon asked, frowning. Fine. Just tired. She paid quickly and sent him on his way. The moment the door closed, Mabel pressed both hands to her marked shoulder. Ronan Drace. The Alpha King. The White Wolf. It explained the power she'd felt. The dominance that made her skin prickle from 30 feet away. The coordinated attack meant to kill him. And the mark. The crown. You complete idiot, she whispered to herself. You saved the Alpha King and took his pain into yourself and bound yourself to him. The mark pulsed again, warmer this time. And with it came an emotion so clear she couldn't mistake it. Longing. Deep and aching and not hers. Coming from somewhere far away. Traveling through the bond she hadn't known she was creating. Mabel sat on her bed and stared at her marked shoulder. What are you doing to me? She asked the empty cabin. Silence answered. But the mark kept beating, steady as a drum, connecting her to a king she'd never meant to find. 2 months passed like water through Mabel's fingers. The seasons shifted. Snow melted into mud. Early spring flowers pushed through the soggy ground. The forest around her cabin slowly came back to life. But the mark never faded. It stayed silver and clear beneath her skin, visible when she undressed, hidden under high collars during the day. The crown symbol at its center had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. The emotional pulses continued. Some days they were faint, barely noticeable. Other days they hit like waves, exhaustion that made her need to sit down even though she'd done nothing tiring, anger that burned through her veins for no reason she could name, and sometimes, late at night, a loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. She learned to live with it. What else could she do? Mabel kept to her routine, healed the villagers who came seeking help, traded herbs for supplies, maintained her cabin and garden, built a life that looked normal from the outside. But at night, when the mark warmed against her skin, she dreamed. Stone halls lit by torches, the smell of old wood and weapon oil, the sound of soldiers reporting casualties, a crown that felt too heavy to wear. Mabel would wake with her heart pounding, knowing these weren't her memories. They were his. Ronan Drace, the Alpha King, fighting battles she couldn't see, carrying burdens she didn't understand, and somehow, through the mark binding them together, she felt echoes of his life bleeding into hers. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt strangely intimate, like being allowed to see someone's soul when they thought no one was watching. She never told anyone, not even Kaya when her friend visited with news from the pack. Darian's got himself a new Omega, Kaya said, settling onto Mabel's front step with tea. Leona, pretty thing, wears jewelry like she's already royalty. Mabel's stomach twisted, but she kept her voice neutral. Good for him. Is it? Kaya gave her a sharp look. Because from what I hear, he treats her like a prize he won, not a person. That's Darian's way. Mabel sipped her tea and tried not to think about how he'd treated her the same way. Like something to show off in private and reject in public. Kaya was quiet for a moment, then softer. You seem different. Can't put my finger on it. But something's changed. Mabel's hand drifted to her shoulder before she could stop herself. I'm fine. Just tired. Kaya didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. They finished their tea talking about safer things. The weather, the upcoming harvest gathering, small village gossip that meant nothing. After Kaya left, Mabel stood in her cabin and felt the mark pulse warm against her skin. You're making everything complicated, she told it. The mark didn't respond. It never did with words, just feelings, just heat, just that steady connection to someone she'd saved and would probably never see again. Spring deepened into early summer. The harvest gathering approached, that annual celebration where all the nearby packs and villages came together to trade goods and celebrate survival through another hard season. Mabel normally avoided it. Too many eyes, too many memories of the moon feast rejection that had driven her into exile. But she needed supplies she couldn't get from traveling merchants. Herbs that only grew in the southern territories, fabric for new winter clothes, things that required actual money and actual trading. The gold coins Ronan had left were still hidden under a loose floorboard in her cabin. She'd used almost none of them, afraid somehow that spending his payment would sever the connection she didn't want to admit she'd grown used to. But practical needs won out over complicated feelings. So on the morning of the harvest gathering, Mabel, dressed in her plainest dress, wrapped a shawl tight around her shoulders to hide the mark, and walked the long path to town. The gathering was already in full swing when she arrived. Bright banners hanging between buildings, the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread making her stomach growl. Music drifting from the center square where someone played a fiddle badly but enthusiastically. Too bright, too loud, too many people. Mabel kept her head down and moved quickly to the herb merchant's stall. Bought what she needed. Paid with coins from her hidden stash. Tried to leave before anyone recognized her. Mabel Voss. Her blood went cold. She turned slowly and found Darian standing 3 feet away. Leona draped on his arm like expensive decoration. He looked the same. Clean jaw, proud smile. Eyes that assessed her worth in a single glance and found her lacking. "Still hiding in the woods?" he asked, loud enough that nearby people turned to look. "Still pretending someone's going to want you?" Leona giggled. The sound cut like glass. "Darian," Mabel said carefully. "I'm just here for supplies." "Of course you are." He moved closer, blocking her path. "Because what else would you be doing? It's not like you have a mate, not like anyone's going to claim you." The mark on her shoulder started to warm. Just slightly. A warning Mabel felt in her bones. "Let me pass." "Why?" "Embarrassed." Darian's smile turned cruel. "You should be. Walking around like you're worth something when everyone knows the truth." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried to everyone watching. "Too fat to have a mate. Remember? That's what I said. That's what everyone thinks." "Did you really believe leaving the pack would change that?" The mark ignited. Not warm. Not hot. Burning. Heat tore through Mabel's shoulder like someone had pressed fire against her skin. She gasped, one hand flying to the mark, unable to stop herself. The air changed. Mabel felt it before she understood it. The way every wolf in the marketplace suddenly went still. The way conversations died mid-sentence. The way even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Dominance flooded the gathering like a wave, raw and undeniable and absolutely terrifying. Alphas in the crowd stepped back without meaning to. Omegas dropped their eyes. Even the humans in attendance felt something wrong enough to stop moving. Darian's face went white. "What?" A wolf burst from the tree line, white as moonlight. Moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Gold eyes fixed on the marketplace like a predator who'd found prey. People scattered. Stalls knocked over. Someone screamed. The white wolf didn't slow. He covered the distance to the market center in seconds, his powerful body eating up ground, and skidded to a stop directly in front of Mabel. The marketplace fell into absolute silence. The wolf's sides heaved with effort. Blood stained his muzzle. Fresh wounds marked his shoulders. He'd clearly been in another fight recently. But his eyes were clear and focused and locked on Mabel like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Then, he shifted. The change happened in a single fluid motion. White fur to pale skin to lean muscle. The wolf becoming a man who stood before her in travel-worn leathers, his hair like stormlight, his face sharp and beautiful and familiar from her dreams. Ronan Drace, the Alpha King. He didn't look at the crowd. Didn't acknowledge Darian frozen 3 feet away. Didn't seem to notice the entire gathering staring at him in shock. He looked at Mabel. "I felt you," Ronan said. His voice was rough, raw, like he'd been running for days. "I felt your pain." Mabel's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at the man her body had been connected to for months. Ronan's gaze dropped to her shoulder, hidden beneath shawl and dress, and something in his expression softened. "May I?" he asked her quietly. Not the crowd, not Darian, her. Mabel managed a nod. Ronan reached out slowly, his movements careful, and pulled the shawl away from her shoulder. Then, with gentle fingers, he eased the collar of her dress down. The mark glowed silver in the afternoon sun. The crowd gasped. Mabel heard it ripple through the marketplace. Shock, awe, fear. The crown symbol shone at the center of the mark, bright and undeniable. Ronan traced it with one finger, his touch feather-light, his eyes never leaving hers. "This," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent marketplace, "is my claiming mark." He took Mabel's hand and lifted it to his mouth, pressed a slow kiss to her knuckles that made heat curl low in her stomach in a way that felt completely unfair given the circumstances. Then he turned to face Darian. The temperature dropped. Ronan's expression didn't change. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, didn't need to. The dominance rolling off him was threat enough. "You," Ronan said calmly. And calm from a king was the most dangerous thing Mabel had ever heard. Rejected her, mocked her, made her believe she was worth nothing. Darian tried to speak. No sound came out. "This woman," Ronan continued, his hand still holding Mabel's. Saved my life when I was dying. She took my pain into herself. She healed me at great cost. She earned this mark through compassion and sacrifice." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the crowd understand. "The woman you called too fat to have a mate is carrying the Alpha King's claiming mark." Someone in the crowd made a choked sound. Leona looked like she might faint. Ronan's eyes never left Darian's face. "Tell me," he said softly, "why did you reject her? What made you think you had the right to treat her as less than worthy?" Darian's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. His voice cracked. "I didn't know. I never thought." "You didn't think," Ronan agreed. "And now everyone here understands what you are." He turned back to Mabel, and the fury in his face melted into something gentler. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Somewhere private. Will you come with me?" Mabel's whole body trembled. From shock. From the mark burning against her skin. From the way his hand held hers like she was something precious. "Yes," she whispered. Ronan nodded once. Then he looked at the crowd. At Darian. At the gathering that would never forget this moment. "If anyone here," he said clearly, "speaks against her again, they answer to me." The threat settled over the marketplace like snow. Ronan led Mabel away from the stairs and whispers, his hand steady on hers, and she followed because her whole life had just shattered and rebuilt itself in the space of 5 minutes. Behind them, Darian stood frozen in the ruins of his pride, and the marketplace slowly remembered how to breathe. Ronan led Mabel to a quiet spot at the edge of the gathering, where trees pressed close, and the noise from the market faded to background murmur. He turned to face her, still holding her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in small circles that made her skin tingle. "I'm sorry," he said first. Mabel blinked. "For what?" "For leaving without explanation. For taking so long to come back." His jaw tightened. "For not protecting you from that man's cruelty. You couldn't have known." "I felt it." Ronan's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Through the bond, I felt your humiliation. Your pain. I was 50 miles north, dealing with rebel stragglers, and suddenly your emotions hit me so hard I nearly fell off my horse." Mabel stared at him. "You felt that? All this time you've been feeling everything." His gold eyes held hers. "Your loneliness, your exhaustion, your determination to keep surviving even when it hurt. I felt all of it. I thought it was one-sided," Mabel whispered. "I thought the bond only went from you to me." Ronan shook his head. "It goes both ways. It always has. From the moment you healed me, from the moment the mark appeared, we've been connected." He paused. "I tried to come back sooner, but the war, Eldon told me, rebels, the capital. I had to make sure my kingdom was secure before I could leave. I couldn't risk leading danger to your door." His free hand lifted to her shoulder, hovering just above the mark. "But I left you alone too long. Left you vulnerable. That ends now." Mabel's breath shook. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that mark on your shoulder isn't just a bond. It's a claim." "My claim." Ronan's voice dropped lower. "I'm saying you're mine. Mabel Voss. And I'm asking if you'll accept that." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're the Alpha King. I'm nobody. You're the woman who saved my life when you had every reason to leave me to die. You're brave and compassionate and stronger than you know." His thumb traced the mark through her dress, making heat bloom under her skin. "You're mine, if you want to be." Mabel looked at him, really looked, at the exhaustion in his eyes that matched what she'd felt through the bond, at the fresh wounds on his shoulders that told her he'd been fighting recently, at the way he held her hand like letting go might break him. "I don't know how to be what you need," she said honestly. "I don't know how to be a queen. I don't need a queen." Ronan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the best way. "I need you. The woman who talks to unconscious wolves while she stitches them. The woman who lives alone and survives through stubbornness and skill. The woman who chose compassion over safety. They'll judge me. The court. They'll say I'm not fit. Let them." His eyes blazed. "Let them say whatever they want. I chose you the moment I pressed my mark into your skin. I chose you when I left payment to keep you safe. I chose you every time I felt your heart through the bond and knew I'd found something rare." Mabel's eyes stung. "This is insane." "Probably." A small smile curved his mouth. "Does that mean no?" She thought about her cabin, her quiet life, the safety of being alone where no one could hurt her. Then she thought about the bond pulsing warm between them. About months of feeling his presence like a second heartbeat. About standing in a marketplace while Darian mocked her and knowing somewhere, far away, Ronan had felt her pain. "It means yes," she whispered. Ronan's expression transformed. The fierce king became something younger, almost vulnerable. Yes? Yes. Louder now. I accept your claim. The mark on her shoulder flared brilliant silver. Heat washed through her whole body, and through the bond, she felt Ronan's response. Relief so powerful it made her dizzy, joy that felt like sunlight, possessive satisfaction that made her cheeks flush. He pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, and pressed his forehead to hers. Thank you, he breathed. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, the bond between them settling into something new, not just connection. Acceptance. Choice. When Ronan finally pulled back, his expression had hardened again. We need to deal with Darien. Mabel's stomach tightened. What are you going to do? Whatever you want me to do. He touched her face gently. He humiliated you publicly. The law gives me the right to strip his rank, exile him, or worse. Worse? Mabel asked carefully. There are old laws about how alphas who abuse omegas should be punished. Most aren't pleasant. Ronan's jaw set. But I won't act without your consent. This is your justice, not mine. Mabel thought about Darien standing in the market, white-faced, watching his cruelty come back to destroy him. She thought about Leona's shock, about the crowd that had witnessed everything, about how satisfying it would be to watch Ronan hurt him the way he'd hurt her. But that satisfaction would come with a cost. She'd seen enough of revenge to know it usually poisoned the person seeking it. I don't want you to kill him, she said slowly, or torture him. I just want him to understand he was wrong. Ronan studied her face. You're being merciful. I'm being practical. If you destroy him, people will say I'm vindictive, that I used your power for revenge. Mabel met his eyes. I want to be better than he was. I want to prove I'm worthy of this mark for reasons that have nothing to do with punishment. Something shifted in Ronan's expression. Respect. Maybe even admiration. All right. We'll do it your way. He took her hand again. But he still faces consequences. That's not negotiable. They walked back to the marketplace together. The crowd hadn't dispersed. If anything, more people had gathered, drawn by rumors of the Alpha King appearing in their small gathering. Darien stood exactly where they'd left him. Leona, now several feet away, her face pale and frightened. Ronan didn't waste time with preamble. Darien Voss, he said, his voice carrying across the silent marketplace. You rejected your mate publicly. You humiliated her. You used your position as an alpha to make her feel worthless. Darien's throat worked. My king, I'm not finished. Ronan's tone could have cut stone. The woman you rejected is carrying my claiming mark. She healed me when I was dying. She saved the Alpha King's life through sacrifice and compassion. He paused, letting that sink in. You called her too fat to have a mate. You said she would break an alpha's pride. You were wrong on every count. Darien tried to speak. Ronan raised a hand and he fell silent. As Alpha King, I could strip your rank, exile you, make an example that would echo through every territory. Ronan glanced at Mabel. But my mate has asked for mercy, so you'll have it, with conditions. He stepped forward, dominance rolling off him in waves that made Darien drop his eyes. You're stripped of your position in Varenpak. Your property is forfeit. You have 1 week to leave this territory. If you ever speak against Mabel Voss again, if you ever show your face in her presence, the mercy ends. Ronan's eyes blazed gold. Do you understand? Yes, Darien whispered. Yes, my king. Good. Ronan turned away from him like he was nothing. Dismissed. Unimportant. He addressed the crowd instead. Let this be known throughout all territories. Mabel Voss is under my protection. She wears my claiming mark. Anyone who treats her with anything less than respect answers to me personally. The marketplace erupted in whispers. Mabel felt 100 eyes on her, assessing, judging, recalculating her worth now that she stood beside the Alpha King. Ronan touched her shoulder, right over the hidden mark, and looked at her with an expression that made her chest ache. I need to return to the capital, he said quietly. But I want you to come with me. Not as a command, as a request. Now. Mabel's mind spun. But my cabin. I'll send people to collect your belongings, to secure your home if you want to keep it. His hand slid down to take hers. But I've been separated from you for months. I felt every moment of your loneliness through the bond and couldn't do anything about it. I don't want to leave you behind again. Mabel looked at the crowd. At Darien, broken and humiliated. At Kaya in the back, watching with wide eyes. At the life she'd built here, small and safe and lonely. Then she looked at Ronan. At the king who'd felt her pain from 50 miles away and come running. At the man who held her hand like she was precious. At the bond between them pulsing warm and alive with possibility. I'll come, she said. Ronan's smile could have lit the whole marketplace. He pulled her close, right there in front of everyone, and kissed her. Not a quick kiss, not a polite one. A real kiss that tasted like promise and possession, and something deeper than either. His hand cupped her face. His mouth moved against hers with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the dominance she'd felt moments before. The mark on her shoulder glowed bright enough to see through her dress. When Ronan finally pulled back, his eyes were molten gold. "Mine," he said softly. "Yours," Mabel agreed, breathless. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the Alpha King took his mate's hand and led her toward the horses waiting at the edge of the gathering. Mabel looked back once. Saw Darian standing alone, his pride in ruins. Saw Leona hurrying away before anyone could blame her for his choices. Saw the marketplace that would talk about this day for years. Then she turned forward, toward the road north, toward the capital and court and a future she couldn't begin to imagine. The mark pulsed warm against her skin, and through the bond she felt Ronan's satisfaction, his relief, his determination to keep her safe. Whatever came next, at least she wouldn't face it alone. The journey to the capital took 3 days. Ronan traveled with a small guard, 20 soldiers who moved like shadows and watched the forest like they expected attack at any moment. Mabel rode beside him on a horse he'd commandeered from the marketplace, trying not to think about how her entire life had changed in the space of an afternoon. They didn't talk much during the days. Ronan had work that couldn't wait, messengers arriving with reports, decisions that needed his immediate attention. But at night, when they stopped to make camp, he sought her out. The first night, he sat beside her at the fire and explained. "I was hunting rebels when they ambushed me," he said, voice low so only she could hear. 20 of them, coordinated. Someone had told them where I'd be. "A traitor in your court," Mabel said. "Yes." His jaw tightened. "I fought my way out but barely. Made it into the forest before I collapsed. If you hadn't found me, but I did." She touched his hand. "You're here now." "I am." He turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together. "I wanted to come back to you immediately, but I couldn't leave the capital vulnerable. Couldn't risk leading enemies to your door. You sent the gold. I sent everything I could while keeping you hidden. Messengers with supplies left at your doorstep. Guards watching from a distance to make sure no one threatened you." His thumb brushed her knuckles. "I felt you through the bond every day. Your strength. Your determination. It helped me survive the battles I couldn't avoid." Mabel's throat tightened. "I thought you'd forgotten about me." "Never." Ronan lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed a kiss to her palm that made heat pool low in her stomach. "The bond wouldn't let me forget, even if I wanted to." Which I didn't. The second night, they talked about what came next. "The court will challenge you," Ronan said bluntly. "Nobles who think you're not worthy. Alphas who wanted their daughters in your position. People who'll question how a lone Omega healer became the king's mate." "I know." Mabel stared into the fire. "I'm not blind to what this looks like. Let them question." His arm slipped around her waist, pulling her against his side. "You saved my life. You earned that mark. Anyone who can't see your worth isn't someone whose opinion matters. Easy for you to say. You're the king, which means I decide what matters." He turned her face toward him, his expression fierce. "You're mine, Mabel. That's the only fact that counts. The rest is just noise." The third night, they arrived at the capital as the sun set. Mabel's first glimpse of the palace took her breath away. Stone towers rising against the darkening sky. Walls that looked like they'd stood for centuries. Guards in formal armor lining the entrance. Banners bearing Ronan's crest, snapping in the evening wind. This was going to be her home. This impossible, overwhelming place. "Breathe," Ronan said beside her. "You look like you're about to run." "I might," Mabel admitted. "Don't." His hand found hers in the growing dark. "I didn't drag you here to watch you flee. I brought you here because you belong with me. Trust that, even when everything else feels uncertain." They rode through gates that opened for them, into a courtyard filled with servants and nobles, and people whose stares made Mabel's skin prickle. She heard the whispers immediately. Saw the way eyes tracked her, assessing, judging. Saw the shock on faces when they noticed how Ronan kept her close. A woman stepped forward, older, elegant, her expression carefully neutral. "My king," she said, bowing. "Welcome home." "Alara," Ronan said, and Mabel's heart lurched before she realized this wasn't her sister. Different woman, same name. "This is Mabel Voss, my mate. I expect rooms prepared for her immediately." Alara's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered fast. "Of course, my king. Will she be staying in the guest wing?" "She'll stay in my wing." Ronan's tone left no room for argument. "In the rooms adjacent to mine." Make sure she has everything she needs. Yes, my king. The next hours passed in a blur. Servants showing Mabel to rooms that were larger than her entire cabin, helping her bathe, bringing her clothes that actually fit properly, soft fabrics that felt like luxury against her skin. When she finally emerged, dressed in a simple but well-made gown, Ronan was waiting. He'd cleaned up too, changed into formal clothes that made him look less like the wounded wolf she'd healed and more like the king he actually was. But his eyes still held that same intensity when they looked at her. Better? He asked. Overwhelmed, Mabel admitted. Join me for dinner. Just us. No court politics tonight. He led her to a private dining room, smaller and more intimate than she'd expected. A table set for two, food that smelled incredible, wine that probably cost more than everything she'd owned in her previous life. They ate quietly at first. Mabel was too nervous to taste much, too aware of how his eyes followed her every movement. Ask me, Ronan said finally. Ask you what? Whatever questions are making you look like you might bolt. He set down his wine glass. I can feel your anxiety through the bond. Let's address it before it gets worse. Mabel put down her fork. Why me? I already told you. No, I mean really. Why me? She met his gaze directly. You're the Alpha King. You could have any Omega in any territory. Beautiful ones. Connected ones. Women who were raised to be queens. Why choose someone who was rejected and humiliated? Someone who lives alone in the woods? Someone who saved my life when she had every reason to let me die, Ronan interrupted. Who took my pain into herself knowing it might destroy her. Who showed more courage in a single night than most nobles show in their entire lives. He stood and moved around the table to her. Knelt beside her chair so they were eye level. You want to know why I chose you? Because when I woke up in your cabin and saw you collapsed on the floor from healing me, I felt something I've never felt before. Not gratitude. Not debt. Something deeper. His hand cupped her face. The bond might have started because you healed me, but it stayed because of who you are. Your strength. Your compassion. The way you talk to unconscious wolves like they're people. The way you chose mercy for Darian even when vengeance would have felt better. I'm not special, Mabel whispered. You are to me. Ronan's thumb brushed her cheek. And that's what matters. Not what the court thinks. Not what nobles whisper. What I know. What I feel through the bond every day. Mabel's breath shook. I'm scared. I know. I can feel that too. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. But you're not alone anymore. You have me. You have the mark. You have a bond that makes you part of my soul whether we intended it or not. This is insane, she said again, like she had in the forest. Probably, he agreed, like he had then. Does it change your answer? Mabel looked at him. Really looked. At the king who knelt beside her chair like she was the one with power. At the man who'd felt her humiliation from 50 miles away and come running. At the bond pulsing warm between them, alive with emotion. No, she said softly. It doesn't change my answer. Ronan's expression transformed. He surged up and kissed her, deeper than before, his hands tangling in her hair. The kiss tasted like relief, and possession, and promise, all at once. When he pulled back, his eyes were molten gold. Stay with me tonight, he said. Not for anything except being close. I've felt you through the bond for months, but I've barely touched you. I want you near. That's all. Mabel nodded, unable to speak past the emotion, clogging her throat. Ronan led her to his chambers, larger than any room she'd ever seen. A bed that could fit 10 people, windows overlooking the city, everything speaking of power and position. But when he pulled her down beside him on that massive bed, when he held her close with his face buried in her hair, none of the grandeur mattered. Thank you, he whispered against her temple. For choosing me back. For trusting this. Mabel curled into his warmth, the bond between them singing with contentment, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth the fear. The coronation was set for 2 weeks after Mabel's arrival at the capital. 2 weeks for the court to adjust, for nobles to process, for Mabel to learn protocol and politics, and how to survive in a world where every gesture carried meaning. It was the hardest 2 weeks of her life. The court tested her constantly. Subtle insults wrapped in polite words. Questions designed to expose her low birth. Comparisons to other Omegas who'd been more suitable. Lady Constance was the worst. A noble with daughters she'd hoped to marry to Ronan. She made sure Mabel knew exactly what the court thought of her. Such an unusual choice, Constance said one afternoon, her smile sharp. A healer from the borderlands. With no family connections, no training for court life. One wonders what could possibly qualify you for this position. Mabel met her eyes calmly. I saved the king's life. Perhaps that qualifies me more than being born into the right family." Constance's smile froze. "How fortunate that you were there to help. Almost suspiciously fortunate." The implication was clear. Some in court believed Mabel had engineered the situation, that she'd somehow caused Ronan's injury to force the bond. Mabel refused to defend herself against accusations that ridiculous. Instead, she focused on what she could control. She established a healers program in the city, treating the poor who couldn't afford proper medicine. She visited villages, still recovering from the war, bringing supplies and knowledge. She showed the court that being queen didn't just mean wearing a crown. It meant serving. Slowly, the whispers began to change. Not all of them, but enough. "She actually helps people," one merchant told another within Mabel's hearing. "Not like the nobles who just talk about charity." "The king chose well," another voice said. "She has a healer's heart." At night, when the court exhausted her, Ronan was there. He'd hold her in his chambers, his presence steady and warm, the bond between them pulsing with support. "They're afraid of you," he said one night. "That's why they attack." "Afraid of me?" Mabel laughed without humor. "I'm nobody. You're the woman who earned my mark without trying. Without politics or manipulation. You're proof that worth isn't about birth or connections." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That terrifies people who've built their entire identity on being born into the right family. I just want to help people." "I know. That's what makes you perfect for this." He pulled her closer. "A queen should serve, not just rule. You understand that instinctively." 3 days before the coronation, Mabel received a letter. It arrived with Kaya, who'd traveled to the capital specifically to deliver it. "From your sister," Kaya said, pressing the folded paper into Mabel's hands. "Ilara wanted you to know she's proud of you." Mabel's eyes stung as she read the letter. Ilara's handwriting, fierce and messy, filled with love and support and threats against anyone who hurt Mabel. "Tell her I miss her," Mabel said. "Tell her yourself at the coronation." Kaya grinned. "She's coming. Wouldn't miss watching you become queen for anything." The night before the coronation, Ronan took Mabel to a private balcony overlooking the city. Lights spread below them like stars. The moon hung full and bright overhead. The air smelled like summer flowers and distant wood smoke. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said quietly. "I know." Mabel leaned against him. "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand what this means." He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "But don't let fear make you doubt. You've already proven yourself. Tomorrow is just making it official. What if I fail? Then you fail beside me. And we figure out how to succeed together." He touched the mark on her shoulder, still visible through the formal gown she wore. "This bond ties us. Your failures are mine. My victories are yours. We're in this together now." Mabel rose on her toes and kissed him, soft at first, then deeper when his arms came around her waist. The bond between them flared bright, carrying emotion both ways. His determination, her hope, the love neither of them had said aloud yet, but both felt clearly. When they finally parted, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "In case that wasn't clear." Mabel's breath caught. "You don't have to say that just because." "I love you," he repeated, stronger now. "I've felt you through the bond for months. I know your heart, your strength, your fears, and I love all of it, every piece." Tears ran down Mabel's cheeks before she could stop them. "I love you too." He kissed her again, tasting salt and promise, and the night wrapped around them like a blessing. The coronation dawned bright and clear. Mabel dressed in formal robes that felt impossibly heavy, silver thread embroidered across deep blue fabric, a ceremonial collar that would show the mark when the time came. Servants fussed over her hair, her face, making sure everything was perfect. When they finally finished, Mabel looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Not because of the clothes, because of the expression in her eyes, the strength there, the determination. This was really happening. The throne room was packed. Nobles from every territory, pack leaders from the borderlands, common people who'd been allowed in to witness, even Ilara, standing near the front with Kaya, both of them grinning like fools. Ronan stood at the center in full regalia, his crown gleaming in the light streaming through high windows. He looked every inch the king. When Mabel entered, silence fell. She walked toward him, each step measured, feeling every eye on her. The mark on her shoulder pulsed warm, giving her strength. She reached Ronan and he smiled, small and private, just for her. The ceremony began. An elder priest spoke words Mabel barely heard, about duty and service and the sacred bond between mates, about the responsibility of queens and the strength required to stand beside kings. Then came the moment that mattered. "Show the mark," the priest commanded. Mabel's hands trembled as she pulled aside the ceremonial collar. The mark glowed silver against her skin, the crown symbol clear and bright. Gasps echoed through the throne room. A true claiming mark, the priest said, voice carrying. Proof of bond and choice. Recognized by ancient law as sacred and binding. He lifted a second crown. Smaller than Ronan's, but no less impressive. Delicate silver worked into designs that matched the mark on Mabel's shoulder. Do you accept this crown? The priest asked her. Do you vow to serve this kingdom beside your mate? Do you promise to lead with wisdom and compassion? Mabel's voice came out stronger than she expected. I do. The crown settled on her head, surprisingly light despite everything it represented. The priest turned to the crowd. I present Queen Mabel of the Drace line. Marked and crowned. Mate to the Alpha King. The throne room erupted in sound, some cheering, some clearly still skeptical, but enough approval that Mabel's heart steadied. Ronan took her hand and pulled her close, kissing her in front of everyone. The mark on her shoulder glowed brighter, visible even through cloth, pulsing in time with both their heartbeats. When he pulled back, his eyes held nothing but pride. My queen, he said softly. My king, Mabel answered. The celebration that followed lasted into the night. Music and dancing and feasting that seemed endless. Mabel stayed close to Ronan, drawing strength from his presence and the bond between them. Alara found her during a quiet moment, pulling her into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, Alara whispered. You took everything they said about you and proved them all wrong. I had help, Mabel said, squeezing back. You had yourself. That's what mattered. Alara pulled back, eyes bright. You're going to be an incredible queen. Later, when the formal parts ended and guests began to drift toward their rooms, a servant approached Mabel nervously. Your Majesty, there's a man requesting audience. He says it's urgent. Who? Darian Voss. Mabel's blood went cold. Beside her, Ronan stiffened. He has a lot of nerve, Ronan said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. I told him never to show his face near you again. Let me talk to him, Mabel said quietly. Just for a moment. I want to hear what he has to say. Ronan looked like he wanted to refuse, but after a moment, he nodded. I'm coming with you. They met Darian in a small antechamber off the main hall. He looked smaller than Mabel remembered, diminished. The proud alpha who'd rejected her was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't meet her eyes. Your Majesty, he said, the title sounding wrong in his mouth. I came to apologize. Did you? Mabel said flatly. I was cruel. I said things I can never take back. I hurt you in ways that... His voice cracked. I was wrong. About everything, and I'm sorry. Mabel studied him for a long moment, looking for sincerity, finding only regret. Your apology doesn't change what happened, she said finally. It doesn't undo the humiliation. It doesn't erase the pain. I know, but I accept it anyway. Mabel straightened. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because holding on to anger would only hurt me. So I'm letting it go. I'm choosing to move forward without the weight of what you did. Darian's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Don't thank me. Mabel's voice hardened. And don't ever come back. I'm giving you mercy once. There won't be a second time. She turned away from him, taking Ronan's offered hand, and walked out without looking back. Behind them, Darian stood alone with his regret. Months passed. Mabel settled into her role as queen with a determination that surprised even her. She expanded the healer programs, established schools in villages that had never had education, worked with other packs to build alliances based on mutual benefit rather than domination. The court learned to respect her. Not all of them, some still whispered, but enough that her position became secure, and the bond with Ronan deepened into something neither of them had expected. Not just connection, true partnership. He sought her counsel on decisions. She challenged his assumptions when needed. They built something together that was stronger than either of them alone. One evening, as they sat together watching sunset from their balcony, Mabel felt something shift, a familiar warmth, a pulse from the mark that felt different somehow. She pressed a hand to her stomach, understanding flooding through her. Ronan, she said quietly. He looked at her, immediately alert. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Mabel met his eyes. I'm pregnant. Ronan went completely still. Then his face transformed into joy so pure it took her breath away. You're certain? The mark told me. And I know what it feels like now. There's life growing inside me, our child. Ronan pulled her into his arms, careful despite the fierce emotion flooding the bond. An heir, or a daughter, Mabel said, smiling against his chest. We don't know yet. I don't care. He pulled back just enough to see her face, Boy or girl, they'll be loved, protected, raised to be strong and compassionate like their mother. Mabel's eyes stung, and fierce like their father. They stood together on the balcony, watching the sun set over their kingdom, and Mabel thought about how far she'd come. From the girl who'd been rejected in a pack circle to the queen who ruled beside the Alpha King. From the woman who'd believed she was worthless to the mother who would raise the next heir. The mark on her shoulder pulsed warm, carrying Ronan's love and pride through the bond. And Mabel knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was always meant to be. Not because fate had decided for her, because she'd chosen it. Despite fear, despite doubt, despite every voice that told her she wasn't worthy, she'd chosen love, chosen partnership, chosen a future that had seemed impossible. And in choosing, she'd found everything she'd never known she needed. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you enjoyed Mabel and Ronan's journey, please like this video, subscribe to Ariel Romance Library for more werewolf romance stories, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything, and we can't wait to share the next epic love story with you soon.